Start of my hike to Athabasca Pass. It's 49.1 kilometers. It's August 26th, 2012. It's 1 p.m. I've been walking for about 45 minutes, probably done a kilometer or so, or more than that. The trail's pretty daunting. 2 cars in the parking lot, so somebody's out here. It's a little depressing right now, but the mood starts to change quickly as the boots wear in and the pack starts to settle down. So we'll give you updates later. I know many of you would like to hike alone and have hesitation, and I'll tell you, it's rewarding because you're not always talking to somebody else. You know, you're on the trail and you're alone with your thoughts, and sometimes you have an event like this where you get a place to yourself and you can really collect your thoughts. But it's also an accomplishment to be able to say that you've gone somewhere on your own, especially a long distance, is quite rewarding. So I encourage everyone to try and hike alone. And what I want to do is I want to just give you pointers that will help you to hike alone. So I mean, the first thing is you have to be mentally prepared, because you're going to be lonely. And you know, one of the ways to deal with the loneliness, I always think, is to spend more time on the trail and enjoy the trail, because camp is the loneliest time when you're alone in camp. So unless of course you show up at a camp and there's other people. But so I spend more time on the trail than I do in camp when I'm alone. That's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is, of course, to start off slow and do trails that are more popular, but do them alone. So a good example of that would be the Skyline Trail in Jasper. So if you go on the Skyline Trail but you do it alone, you will not be alone. You'll be alone during the day, but you know, it's a 42-kilometer hike, and you can do it, let's say, in 2 nights or 3 nights, and every night when you get to camp, you'll have hiked by yourself, but there'll be fellow hikers around you. So if there's an issue, if there's something, you can rely on the help of others. I said earlier that one of the key things for hiking alone is perhaps to start slow and go on a popular trail, but do it by yourself. And don't push yourself on your first day. Just go, you know, you might do an in and out. Like another example in Alberta is Glacier Lake. Fairly easy hike, popular, only, you know, 8.5, 9 kilometers in. So if you're practicing going alone, go to Glacier Lake. Hopefully there'll be a few people there. Hopefully, maybe not. Maybe that's but you're only going 9 kilometers and then coming back out. So if you do that alone, you'll get used to that feeling. And then maybe on your next trip you do a double day. But the other thing about going alone that I often do is I go counter current. I go in the opposite direction of the popular direction that people hike a trail. So an example is the Brazos Loop. So most people do the Brazos Loop in a counterclockwise fashion, or they do it in a clockwise fashion. So they'll start at Nigel and then they'll go along Jonah Shoulder and Brazos and come back down. But if you're alone, a good strategy is to do it in the opposite direction, because if you're all traveling in the same direction, technically they'll always be in front of you and people will always be behind, and you won't necessarily encounter each other until the end of the day. But if you're going counter to everybody, so if there's 10 groups going in one direction and you're going in the other, you will encounter those 10 groups throughout your trip. So on a popular trail like that, you will encounter a group of people every, let's say, a couple of hours. And so if something were to happen to you, all you have to do is stay stationary where you are, and somebody coming in the other direction will meet you. So traveling in the opposite direction is also a very good strategy. Now when you're hiking alone, it's absolutely essential that you file a plan with somebody. And so I left here, I filed a plan with my wife Karen, and I told her very specifically where I'm going. I said I'm starting at the Klein River, 1 day on the trail, then Pinto, and then I'm coming back in 3 days. And I said I'm expecting to come out on Sunday. I have supplies for more than, 5 days. And she knows that if I don't come out on Sunday, don't panic, but if I don't come out by Monday, then perhaps start to organize, you know, call and get something organized maybe to come looking for me. So a plan is very important. Now, relying on the help of others is a great thing about hiking, but it's also one of the things you really need to consider when you're hiking alone is your risk assessment. And, you know, I have a video up there. I did a risk assessment video a year or two ago, and hiking, contrary to popular belief, is not that hazardous. And when you do the risk assessment, you'll realize there's a few risks, but you can easily mitigate against them with the gear you bring. And if you're really uncomfortable, you can bring a little satellite communication device. But I encourage you to do a risk assessment at home, because what it'll teach you is that by hiking alone, there is a consideration. You do need to bring a little more gear because you need to be absolutely self-sufficient. So something that you might mitigate by being in a group, you can't when you're alone. So an example of that is noise. You know, when you're hiking as a group, you're making noise, and that's mitigating against animal encounters. But alone, that becomes a bigger risk. So so your bear spray is critical, and trying to make noise on the trail is critical. But the other thing about a risk assessment for people who hike alone is that on the trail, you take different risks when you're alone. So keep that in mind. So something as simple as a little river ford that you might do as a group and help each other across. If you're alone, you're going to have to, you know, think more about the consequences. And it's not just things that are obvious like river fords, but it's things like, you know, navigating somewhere that's a little off the beaten path. You don't want to do that too often when you're alone. If you've told people you're going from point A to point B, you want to stick to point A to point B if they come looking for you. So going alone is risky. You have to consider risks like stepping over a log or a slippery rock. Things that might seem minor can have a pretty serious consequence when you're alone if the event goes unplanned. So risk management while you're on the trail is critical. Now, I say being in camp is the loneliest part, but that's true and it's not. One of the ways to enjoy camp more perhaps and avoid the loneliness is you will have chores. So if you hike longer during the day and then you get to camp later, let's say, then you'll spend most of your time in camp at the end of the day setting up your tent, organizing your food, drying your gear, maybe collecting firewood, getting water. So you have more to occupy you. You saw on this trip, it's not uncommon for me to spend 2-3 hours once I get to camp just with chores, and then that leaves me a little bit of time at the end of the day to really relax. But I tend to go to bed early and wake up early when I'm alone. Now, I've been doing this a little bit longer, so I don't find it as lonely in camp. What I like to do in camp is go explore and check out things. And another strategy that I didn't do on this trip, but is to bring a book. You know, here in Alberta, we have lots of daylight, so you can bring a book or something and sit around camp at the end of the day with your fire and read your book. So that's how you deal with the loneliness. But trust me, if you're really worried about loneliness, perhaps hiking on an isolated trail is not your choice. So go, you know, take a popular trail where at the campsite there's going to be 3 or 4 other groups, and then you can socialize with groups. So that's the fantastic way. Now, it's not an option for everybody, but one of the ways I enjoy hiking alone is I bring Tika, a pet, a companion, and it gives you a sense of security and companionship to have a dog along. So, you know, it's not pure solo hiking, but it's pretty close because the dog's not talking back. At least I don't think she is. So there you have it. I mentioned 5 things or 6 things I think that are important for learning to hike alone. So the first one is do a proper risk assessment at home and make sure you have the right gear, because you're alone, so you can't rely on anybody else technically. And then on the trail, same thing, change your mindset, do a few more risk assessments, because things that are, you know, you're alone, so be very careful about where you choose to go, what river you cross, what hill you climb, what side slope you take. Do those things. So risk assessment. Number 2, hike a popular trail, but do it alone. So go on a trail where you know there will be other people, so you'll be alone, you'll have your own tent, you're by yourself, but at night there are other people in camp or perhaps on the trail that can provide support if necessary. Number 3, on that trail, go counterclockwise or in the opposite direction that most people do it. So that's also a strategy, so you'll encounter more people frequently. Number 4, make sure you file a plan. People have to know about where you're going. Number 5 is, what did I say number 5 was? Oh my god, I'm drawing a blank. Number 5, hike longer during the day and spend less time in camp, because camp happens to be the lonely place. Number 6, start small, right? Really start small. So maybe just do an overnight. So go to a place that's 6 or 7 kilometers off the beaten path and camp there, and then come back out. And before you know it, you'll have mastered the art of hiking by yourself. It's a fantastic experience. You know, for me personally, the reason I started hiking alone is because I wanted to go farther and farther, and people just didn't want to go as far as I did, so I ended up having to go alone. And maybe I enjoy the sport more than some, so that was one of my alternatives. Anyways, hope you enjoyed these quick tips, and don't be shy. Get out there on your own, learn it. It's an amazing skill.